The final round of the 2007 season is underway at Interlagos, and home hero Felipe Massa gets away well from pole position. Second place Alonso defending from Takuma Sato into the first corner. Brake lockups from one of the Toro Rossos behind. I think that might have been Alexander Wirtz as they go through the Senna S. And looking up the front, well, at the moment we're looking at the back at one of the spikers chasing a Renault out of the Curva do Sol. But up the front, it is still Felipe Massa leading, Fernando Alonso second, Takuma Sato third, the other Williams of Rubens Barrichello fourth, so both Brazilians well up there, both qualifying very well for the Williams team. Now into the Ferradura, that's still Felipe Massa, and just behind us a Ferrari making a move on one of the BMW Saubers, not quite making that one stick. Now into the twisty section, and Felipe Massa has got a bit of a gap over Alonso, and Alonso himself has got Takuma Sato all over the back of him. Worth mentioning that Takuma Sato leads this championship, but only by 5 points now from Mark Webber, who has hit a good run of form along with his Toyota team ever since Istanbul really, where they've won multiple races, including 2 1-2 finishes. That was at Monza and Spa. And as a result, Mark Webber is within a shot of a championship. Just 5 points behind. Basically, a race win for either of those two drivers will win them the championship. Talking of Webber's teammate, Jenson Button sets the fastest lap, but only the first lap along, and that is Jenson Button making a move on Kimi Raikkonen going through the Senna S. We are on board with Raikkonen. Let's just double check the timing screen to see who that was that overtook Kimi Raikkonen. And it was Mark Webber on the move, and he needs to as well because Sato leads the championship and he's up in third. Just a recap of the previous round at Shanghai. It was a very wet race and a very unusual winner, but no less deserving. Lewis Hamilton in the Super Aguri, and off the track goes Mark Webber! Mark Webber going off the track and spinning at the Laranja corner. Now that is highly dramatic for the championship because if he doesn't rejoin, that's it. He cannot win the championship, but he has got his rear wheels spinning. And he's making a bit of a mess of his rejoin, but Mark Webber making a very serious error very, very early on in the race. So he's got it all to do now. And a bit of an oversteer moment as he rejoins the circuit at the Pinheiro corner. It is still Felipe Massa leading, and it is still Fernando Alonso second. And Felipe Massa, but it is Takuma Sato setting the fastest lap of the race. And with Mark Webber having floundered it and bottled it on the second lap. And if Sato has in fact taken second place off Fernando Alonso going into the Senna S, and well, the camera stopped just as we were about to see a Renault make the move, and it has made the move stick. That was Robert Kubica on Christian Albers. And that must have been Jenson Button making a move on Fernando Alonso going into the Skidder de Largo, and the big contact there between the two Super Aguris. Unbelievable. Hamilton and Hülkenberg having a major collision. Bit hard to see what happened, only caught the end of it, but it might well have been one of them moving across on the other at the braking zone. Best to double check the replay just to see what actually happened, but a calamitous incident for the Super Aguri team, who spectacularly won the Chinese Grand Prix last time out in the hands of Hamilton. Did it from 16th on the grid as well, so that was brilliant stuff. Held off the charging Felipe Massa at the end. And why Hamilton got up there in the first place was because he used a one-stop strategy compared to most of the field's 2. And curiously enough, Jenson Button's 3. And that actually cost him the race win. I mean, made that late pit stop late in the race. And there's the charging Felipe Massa, extending his lead a little bit over Takuma Sato. The gap is 1.4 seconds, but remember, Sato had to overtake Alonso on the previous lap. Kubica having a bit of a lock-up going into the Senna S, but keeping it on track. New fastest lap for Mark Webber, so the charge for the Australian begins now, as he tries to make his way now from 21st, so where did Timo Glock go? I've spotted him in last place, having a bit of a miserable season, a miserable end to the season, and it's just not really working out. So, did Glock have to make a pit stop? We'll see the timing graphic update with the number of pit stops that everyone has made at some point, and we'll try and use that to see if Glock has in fact made a pit stop. So just further down the order, you've got Fernando Alonso in 4th position, having lost 2 places, one to Takuma Sato and the other one to Jenson Button. 5th place, we're on board with 6th place Rubens Barrichello. Who is in front of him? It is Juan Pablo Montoya in the McLaren. The other McLaren is 7th. That is Kimi Raikkonen. And it's Sebastian Vettel having a look at Sergio Perez for 9th place, going down the main straight into the Senna S. Vettel making that one look fairly simple because he has got a very powerful Ferrari engine underneath him. And the BMW Sauber, although it has shown quite well in qualifying of late, hasn't been very reliable. Both Sergio Perez and Nick Heidfeld suffering mechanical issues at Shanghai. And in fact, Perez absolutely clattered it at Fuji, and Heidfeld had his own mechanical drama mid-race that needed an unscheduled pit stop. So it's not been a great end to the season for BMW Sauber, not been a great season for them in general, because they sit 9th in the championship, 7 points behind Ferrari now, because they had Vettel scoring some points last time out at Shanghai, some much needed points for the Ferrari team. Let's focus on the present now, because Felipe Massa going through the Junsao corner, now through the fast sweepers, the fast lefts, which can cause some serious accidents in some places. Now the Arcobancadas, if that's how you pronounce it properly, which means bird grandstands, which lead you onto the main straight, and the gap remains static at 1.4 seconds actually. Matching each other in terms of lap time, Heidfeld has overtaken Rubens Barrichello somewhere on this lap, possibly into the Descida de Lago, so Rubens Barrichello's not showing some great race pace at the moment. Qualified 4th, now he's down in 8th, but it has regained that 7th position off of Nick Heidfeld down the main straight, so Nick has got to try and retake that position off of Rubinho. Look in the background, Rubens is still ahead, having retaken that position. There's 3rd place Jenson Button chasing Takuma Sato for 2nd, and on board with Matthias Lauda chasing Sergio Perez for 11th. Perez has lost another position, this time to the other Ferrari of Jarno Trulli, so Perez not showing some good race pace at this moment. I wonder if he is heavier on fuel. But it could well be the BMW Sauber's soft tyres not really working very well. They qualified quite well up the order, both in the top 10, Perez 9th, Heidfeld 10th. Although Heidfeld's showing quite well in 8th, Perez looks to be dropping back a little bit, so that could well be a heavier fuel load. So on to lap number 7 now, and the gap between Massa and Sato remaining fairly static. It was 1.4 seconds last time out. It has now gone up a little bit by a 10th of a second. On board now with the recovering Super Aguri of Nico Hülkenberg. He's recovered quite well actually. He's back up to 14th place despite that massive contact with his own teammate. Where is his teammate actually? He's down in 19th, so that collision harmed Hamilton a lot more than it harmed Hülkenberg. Sato... Oh, what's happened here? Massa slowing! Felipe Massa slowing from the race lead. I did see a glimpse of Button in 2nd and wondering how on earth he got there, but it's clear that Felipe Massa has got a bit of an issue and that he's going to try and make it back to the pits. So Sato takes the lead of the race now from Jenson Button. Montoya moves up to 3rd. He's just passed Fernando Alonso somewhere. Alonso remains 4th, but now he's got Kimi Raikkonen behind him for that battle for 4th position now, and Massa dropping back. So more unreliability for the Ferrari-powered Williams, and Rubens Barrichello now takes the initiative. Now Heidfeld is going to make up a position at the expense of the limping Brazilian. So the Brazilian crowd, you could hear, well, you could probably hear the hearts thudding to the floor of the grandstand seats at the sight of Felipe Massa slowing down. Just rounding the final few corners, has Massa made it back to the pits? I think he has done, so he does live for another day. And just further up, Robert Kubica and Matthias Lauda making great progress. Perez is slipping back down the order, down to probably his heavier fuel load. I think Kimi Raikkonen's looking to make a move on Fernando Alonso as well. So you can see the Renault, there you can see the recovering Hülkenberg looking to make a move on Perez as well. And the two spikers about to go into battle, that is Alba's making a move on Suttil. Both have been pretty evenly matched throughout the season. They've both got 15 points each. Alba's does have the better individual race place, and that was a 4th place at Monaco. Suttil had a 5th at Silverstone. So if either of those two can score a point, then they'll jump each other. And that will help Spiker avoid finishing last in the Constructors' Championship as well. They only sit 2 points ahead of Toro Rosso, who've had a pretty horrible season, with Ralf Schumacher being ditched by Alexander Wurz, and Wurz struggling to get up to pace with the Mercedes-powered Toro Rosso. Takuma Sato set a new fastest lap of the race. Now that he's taken the race lead, he is trying to eke out the gap over Jenson Button. Interesting to see what strategies everyone goes for. It's a long race, 71 laps. Could see a mixture of 2 and 3 stops. Let's see what happens. And Kimi Raikkonen now making a move on Fernando Alonso, going into Descida de Lago. That's 4th place for the Flying Finn, who sits 7th in the championship. Just 2 points ahead behind Rubens Barrichello. So if Kimi Raikkonen can score 2 more points, then he'll get 6th in the championship. There is also a battle for 3rd in the championship. There's Montoya on 161 points, Button on 157, and Alonso on 148. So that's still very much alive between those three. But the real focus is the battle between Sato and Webber. With Webber recovering, he's now in 19th place. His teammate's up in 2nd. He could do his teammate a big favour if he calculates an overtake that is very difficult for Sato to deal with. Gap 1.1 seconds between Sato and Button. It'll be interesting to see the gaps in the 1st, 2nd and 3rd sectors. Jenson looked quicker in the final sector. Now if we see the gap in the 1st sector change, well, we see Sergio Perez losing yet another place, this time to Nico Hülkenberg. That's for 12th place now. And rounding this centre S, now Perez will have a Toro Rosso to deal with anytime soon. Slow exit as well. And Timo Glock is showing as having made a pit stop, so did Timo have a mechanical issue that forced him into the pits? And he's now got Felipe Massa overtaking him for 21st place. Not the best place in the world to be battling, but at least Massa has just trying to raise the Brazilian crowd's spirits up with that overtake. Sato was actually, he was a 10th quicker in the 1st sector at that time around, so suspecting Toyota have got a very good engine underneath them as they won Spa and Monza by quite some distance as well. So it suggests they've got a very good engine behind them. Now crossing the line, and once again Button quicker in the final sector, not by much, but if Button gets close up to Takuma Sato, that could be very important in terms of making an overtake. Montoya's not too far behind these two actually, he's only 1.6 seconds off. So he's driving quite well. Not too far away from his native country, Colombia. A lot of Colombian fans in the crowd cheering on Juan Pablo. And it's certainly making it work at the moment. It's just 1.6 seconds behind Button, just 3 seconds off of the race lead. But we've seen the McLaren's Pirelli tyres not work particularly brilliantly in the race compared to the Michelin's. They worked very well in qualifying, and at the hands of Montoya and Raikkonen, they're two very, very capable drivers, championship contenders in previous seasons. But the McLaren team might well have mounted a stronger championship challenge. They did actually lose their team boss mid-season, so that could well be another reason why they've not won the Constructors' Championship. Constructors' Championship was indeed settled last time out at Shanghai in the favour of Toyota, who've having a magnificent second half of the season. Quite a few wins here and there in the first parts as Kimi Raikkonen sets a new fastest lap of 1:14.343, so he's now making moves into the top 3. It is still Sato leading from Button. Gap went up a little bit, it was 1.4 seconds as they finished that lap as Mark Webber begins his recovery drive, or continues his recovery drive as he takes Christian Albers for 17th place into the Senna S. Now how far up can he get, but he's going to need quite a bit of luck and a bit of fortune in the form of Takuma Sato, having a bit of a tricky time of it. Interlagos worked out very well for him last time out. He won the championship for the 2nd time. Now he's looking to make it 3 in a row as just at the bottom of the timing screen there, Albers losing another place, this time to Lewis Hamilton. And just having a look further down the order, Fernando Alonso 5th place, Barrichello 6th, Heidfeld doing quite a good job actually. He's some 4 seconds ahead of Jarno Trulli, so he's driving quite well. And if Perez is indeed on a heavier fuel load, we could see Heidfeld coming in first out of those two, maybe even on a 3-stop strategy. Wouldn't be expecting anyone to do a 1-stop, as Montoya sets a new fastest lap. That was 2 thousandths quicker than Kimi Raikkonen's best effort on the previous lap. Another battle coming up, Ferrari versus Super Aguri. It is Hulkenberg looking up the inside of Sebastian Vettel for 11th place, and Hulkenberg makes that one stick. We're seeing a lot of successful moves this time around. We saw a lot of difficulty in trying to overtake other drivers last time out at Shanghai. The outside line at the hairpin was proving quite favourable. But here it seems that the attacking driver is making overtakes stick. They can see Heidfeld. He's quite a long way up ahead of Jarno Trulli. But at some point did get ahead of Sebastian Vettel, so I wonder if Ferrari have also split their strategies if Vettel's dropping down a bit. And Perez has stabilised his pace now. He's fairly comfortable ahead of Nico Rosberg in 13th place. There is Sergio actually, and in fact he got a little bit wide at the exit of Pinerino. That's a little pine tree. Trying to chase Sebastian Vettel's 12th place. And just pushing a little bit too hard. Lost 4 tenths to Nico Rosberg on that. Another new fastest lap for a McLaren. This time it's Kimi Raikkonen, and he's got it underneath 74.3 seconds now. There's your race leader, Takuma Sato. There's second place Jenson Button. Through the haze come the 2 McLarens, Montoya and Raikkonen, and behind those two, Fernando Alonso in 5th place, Barrichello 6th, Heidfeld 7th, Trulli 8th, Matthias Lauda having a very good drive at this moment. From 16th on the grid, he's up into 9th place. That's a good effort. Similarly good is Robert Kubica, also up 7 places from 17th up to 10th at the moment, as Nico Hulkenberg pushing hard, recovering, has locked up a bit going into Descida de Lago. Now he's got Sebastian Vettel to deal with. Look at the German closing up on his younger German. They might well be the same age. In fact, I think Hulkenberg is slightly younger. But the 2 Germans are about to go into battle once again. And just behind these two, if they do start battling, Sergio Perez could be closing up on them. There's Montoya 3rd, coming up the Subida dos Boxes. Now into Aquabancadas. The final kink with the pit entry. Very perilous, but these drivers tend to avoid the white line. Stay to the right of it, actually. Jenson Button setting a new fastest lap as Heidfeld. That's a problem for Heidfeld. That is more dismal reliability for the BMW Sauber. So he's pulled off the circuit on the main straight. That will move Jarno Trulli up into 7th place. And that will help Ferrari's cause to stay ahead of BMW Sauber in the championship, especially as the leading BMW driver is out. So that'll move Matthias Lauda up into 8th place, Kubica 9th, Hulkenberg 10th, Sebastian Vettel up to 11th, Sergio Perez up into 12th place, Nico Rosberg 13th, Suttle 14th, and just behind Mark Webber's making a move. That's on Daniel Ricciardo for 15th place, so Webber continuing his recovery drive. And there's the stationary Nick Heidfeld. Very, very poor run of form ever since Magny Korn. It's a gearbox failure this time. Takuma Sato. About to come onto the main straight now. It's a very unique camera shot. It's like a drone is perfectly flying behind the Honda. And Button is closing in though. Jenson Button is closing in onto the back of the Honda. So we could be seeing a battle for the lead anytime soon. And the 2 McLarens aren't that far behind either. It'll be interesting to see when these drivers make their first pit stops. Because historically this season we have seen the lower fuel load have the bigger advantage over new tyres. Suttle, that's Webber on his inside, or trying to get up the inside. Braking very late is the Toyota car, and Webber retakes another position. That's 14th place for Webber. Next target, Nico Rosberg's 13th. Sato shouldn't get too nervous at this stage. Webber still has a long way to go, and if Sato wins this race, he's world champion anyway. Now we've got Ricciardo versus Suttle for 14th, 15th place. Ricciardo not quite making that one work, and he's got Lewis Hamilton chasing him as well. Button gaining at least 2 tenths in the middle sector of this lap as Sato exits Subida dos Boxes. There you can see the passionate fans on the right hand side as Sato avoids the pit entry line, starts another lap. This is lap 17 now. The gap is 7/10 of a second as Jensen sets a new fastest lap, a 1:14.0. So Jensen's fuel load goes down and his tyres are working quite well at this stage. Rosberg has a bit of a lock-up going into Junsao, and as a result he may come under pressure from Mark Webber as they exit Sobidados boxes onto a small straight, which is basically flat out. In fact, it's flat out from Junsao all the way to the Senna S. Kubica's just gained a position at the expense of Matthias Lauda. That's 8th place for the Renault driver, driving a very, very good race at the moment. Monaco Grand Prix winner, remember, as well, Kubica, in what was a race full of mayhem. Some people like mayhem, others like a simple one. On board with Takuma Sato, looking at him from the side. You can see the many appendages on the car, including chimneys and ducts and all that to keep the car cool, but also to offer some aerodynamic aid. Kubica having a bit of a lock-up and is about to come under pressure from Matthias Lauda. Was pulling away from him, so I suspect Kubica, once he regains his rhythm, will start to pull away once again. I just saw a glimpse of Webber getting very close to Rosberg, so I think Webber's going to be challenging for 13th place coming onto the main straight. And there's Montoya. 2.6 seconds now behind Takuma Sato. Raikkonen 4.9 seconds behind, so the McLarens doing their best to keep in touch of the leading two, but I think ultimately it could well be between Sato and Button. Webber having a look at Rosberg and he's got him already even before they reach the braking zone, so Webber up to 13th place now, cuts back onto the racing line, so that's some straight line speed for the Toyota. And there's last place Timo Glock. He got a lot of airtime in Shanghai, mostly being lapped and getting in Montoya's way. Had a miserable time of it last time, did Montoya, just struggling with the traffic. Had a spin at turn 10 at one point. But for that, he could well have won the race. And there's Glock's teammate in 5th place, and he's got Rubens Barrichello closing in on him now. 1.2 seconds, the gap as they go into Junsao. And behind those two, you've got Jarno Trulli, some 20 seconds behind race leader Sato. So Trulli, although he's driving quite well, has gained 4 places from his grid slot. Doesn't have the pace to keep up with the top 6. So rounding Curva do Sol, and the gap is 0.8 of a second between Takuma Sato, race leader, Jenson Button 2nd place, and Montoya 1.4 seconds behind Button. I think he was a little bit quicker than Sato on that lap, so now the McLarens are starting to gain their feet once again. Mark Webber's next target is 12th place Sergio Perez. Keep an eye on those two. Keep an eye on the gaps between those two on the timing screen. And at the moment, Webber is 0.6 of a second behind as they cross the last sector point. Rosberg some 1.2 seconds behind Mark Webber now, and about to come under pressure from Adrian Sutil. Sutil was just half a second behind as they crossed their last sector point. Lock up for Takuma Sato as he runs a little bit wide at Junsao, and that's going to give Jenson Button a good opportunity to take the race lead off of him. He's right on his gearbox as they go through Sobidados boxes, and he takes the inside line going through Arcobancadas onto the main straight, and Jenson Button's going to take the lead of the race on lap 20. So taking advantage of the mistake from Takuma Sato. Sato hanging on round the outside, but Jenson Button has got the high ground into the turn 2. Now into Curva do Sol. Jenson Button has got it comfortably now. And Sato, he's got Montoya right behind him now. So Sato, having lost the lead, is going to lose 2nd place if he's not careful. But Montoya outbrakes the Honda driver going into Descida do Lago. Lake Descent, that translates to. So, Sato goes from 1st to 3rd in a matter of corners. I suspect he's not going to give up. Take that one lying down though, as he sticks to the back of Montoya's gearbox. And Montoya's not that far behind Button either, so can Montoya do something about the race lead? We have a look at Daniel Ricciardo, having a look at the inside of one of the Toro Rossos. Daniel Ricciardo versus Nico Rosberg. Rosberg now in 15th, so he has lost a position to Adrian Sutil somewhere on the previous couple of laps. Sato's Got a good slipstream behind Montoya, so can he challenge the Colombian going into the first corner? I don't think he was close enough. Hulkenberg now in 10th place. Has got past Sebastian Vettel at some point. And now he's looking to challenge Matthias Lauda for 9th place. Going up the hill. And effectively the flat-out burst onto the next lap and the Senna S curve. There's Perez. And Mark Webber has overtaken Sergio Perez. So Webber now up to 12th, Perez down to 13th. Still suspect on that heavier fuel load. Ricciardo versus Rosberg going into the first corner. Can Ricciardo outbrake the German? Not quite. And now Ricciardo has got Lewis Hamilton to deal with, and Felipe Massa making a move on Alexander Wurz for 19th place, going through the Senna S. Position gain for the Brazilian. Still not totally happy are the crowd, because Felipe Massa was leading the race earlier on. There's Timo Glock down in last place still. How far is he off of the driver in front of him? Let's find out as the timing updates itself. Jenson Button holds a 1.2 second lead over Montoya, who's just 4/10 ahead of Sato, so that battle for second place not done yet. Glock is 6.7 seconds behind Alexander Wurz. I would expect Glock to catch up and pass Wurz at some point. And looking at Montoya's helmet and car, which are very chromed. And no sign of Takuma Sato at the moment as he goes through what looked like Descida de Lago. Just half a second, the gap between Montoya and Sato as they cross that first sector point. Kimi Raikkonen's just 1.5 seconds off of the race leader. Well, 1.5 seconds off of his teammate. In fact, that's still not correct. 1.5 seconds off of Takuma Sato, that's better. And it's just 3.4 seconds off of race leader Jenson Button. Top 4 still very close. Alonso versus Barrichello for 5th. That gap is 1.5 seconds actually. 1.5 seconds between Alonso and Barrichello as we go back on board with Lewis Hamilton. About to make a move on Nico Rosberg, who has now lost that place to Daniel Ricciardo. And the gap's starting to stretch out a little bit between Montoya and Sato as Jenson Button sets a new fastest lap, 1 minute 14.0. Just lowering the benchmark ever so slightly. I would imagine that we will get into sub 74 seconds at some point during the race. Top 4 all in the same straight. Top 5 in the same straight, actually. Fernando Alonso not too far off. Webber versus Vettel for 11th place now. And that's another position gain for Mark Webber. Now he's 1 place off of the points in what is a very fast Toyota. Here is a similarly fast Honda of Sato. Now we switch back to Mark Webber. Next target is Nico Hulkenberg's 10th place. And Hulkenberg just starting to close in a little bit on Matthias Lauda. We haven't seen any scheduled pit stops so far, so I don't think anybody's going to be 3-stopping now, maybe with the exception of Felipe Massa and Timo Glock, as they made pit stops very early on to rectify mechanical issues. So I'm going to imagine that the whole field is going to be 2-stopping for fuel. We'll find out shortly if anyone dives into the pits within the next few laps. I expect Trulli to make a pit stop quite early. He's got a driver right behind him. We'll find out shortly who that is as Mark Webber, pushing hard, locks up a little bit at John Sau as he sets off in hot pursuit of Nico Hulkenberg and Matthias Lauda. It's Trulli versus Kubica actually in the battle for 7th, and just right there Kubica has taken Trulli and continuing his very, very strong drive. From 17th on the grid, now he's up to 7th. That's a gain of 10 places. That's a great effort from Kubica so far. As we pretty much hit 1/3 distance. I'm expecting the next battle on track to be between Matthias Lauda and Nico Hulkenberg, but could well be a 3-way battle if Webber charges up to them in a hurry. Couple of tenths gained on Montoya. Gap going down between Montoya and Sato a little bit in the middle sector. So it looks as if the Honda car works quite well in the middle sector. and it appears that the Toyota-powered cars are very good in a straight line, particularly in the hands of Jenson Button and Mark Webber, if they're being very quick there. Rounding the Senna S in the Curva de Sol, now we switch to Christian Albers in 18th place. Rounding the Bico de Pato, one of the best names for a corner, as it translates literally as Duck's Beak. Nagula, that's the dive, now the junction curve. You can see advertisements on the right hand side, Banco do Brasil and Chevrolet. And then the passionate fans on the right hand side. There's Sato once again, breaking into Laranja, which I think is the orange curve. Now to Pinerino, short straights before you can surprise people going into Bico de Pato with an overtake. Well, it didn't quite work for some real life F1 drivers, but it is possible. This is Hamilton, he's in 16th place, he's overtaken Nico Rosberg at some point, and now he's chasing after, is that the Renault in front of him, of Daniel Ricciardo? I believe so. It'll be a battle for 15th if Hamilton is quicker. Jenson Button breaks the 74-second mark now, he's lapped in 1 minute 13.9. That's a new fastest lap as well. Button stretching his legs now over the field. Possible that he could be one making his pit stop first if he's pulling away a little bit on a lighter fuel load. Still 26 laps in and still no pit stop for fuel. So they're going quite a long way into the race on their first stint. Focusing on the race leader for the moment. He is 2 seconds ahead of Juan Pablo Montoya now. Sato 1.3 seconds behind the Colombian, and Raikkonen a further 1.3 back from Sato. So just looking down the order, Suttle has overtaken Perez at some point, that's for 13th place. Now if they're not 2 or 3 stopping, I wonder if there'll be some drivers that are doing 1 stops. Certainly if they're going this deep into the race for the 2 stoppers, could be that might be a mixture of 1 and 2 stops. Christian Albers versus Felipe Massa for 18th place, going through the Ferradura, that is the horseshoe corner. In the olden days it did look like a horseshoe, when Interlagos was an 8-kilometre long circuit. A new fastest lap for Rubens Barrichello, that's a good effort, as he tries to close in on Fernando Alonso's 5th place. How far back is he? He's 2 seconds off of Alonso. So now Rubens Barrichello's getting a spurt on before the first round of pit stops. And it'll be inside. That's Hulkenberg versus Lauda. That's for 9th place. And Matthias Lauda drops a position to the recovering Nico Hulkenberg, as Jenson Button locks it up going into Pinerino, pushing hard. He's dropped a 10th to Montoya in the first sector. He'll have lost a little bit more with that minor mistake going into Pinerino. How much has he lost? He's actually gained time, so still a good little sector overall for Button. And just looking further down the order, Kubica is 15 seconds off of Barrichello, so I think the top 6 may well be set unless reliability kicks in. And then the battle for 7th, that could go either way. If Kubica's running lighter and on a 2-stop strategy, then other drivers could come into play. I'd imagine Trulli's 2-stopping as well, possibly Hulkenberg and Lauda. Webber's a bit of a question mark. He might well be 2-stopping as well if he's charging back the order this quickly. I'd imagine Perez could be 2-stopping, but could also be 1-stopping if he's heavier on fuel. Let's have a look at Mark Webber. Having a look at Matthias Lauda for 10th place now, so now Mark Webber, once he makes his overtake stick, is back in the points. So if something happens to Sato in that he has to retire from the race with a mechanical issue, then Webber needs 7th. So that's basically 6 points would be enough to overhaul Takuma Sato, or rather 6 points more than Takuma Sato. Task made difficult by spinning off on the very early stages. But the Honda has been a little bit difficult in terms of reliability on occasion, retired last time out with a mechanical issue. And we have seen on a few occasions Sato retiring from the lead of a race. It happened in Sepang, And it happened in other races as well. The Toyota is very quick, but it is also very reliable, and that's what's helped Jenson Button and Mark Webber to Constructors' Championship glory, as well as their good pace. But the key one has been the reliability. They've retired from very few races compared to most of the other teams. Spiker are running the same Toyota engine, and they've been reliable as well. Those on the Ferrari engines, that's the Ferrari Works team and the Williams team, have been quite unreliable, particularly in the hands of Felipe Massa and the Williams team. Massa had at least 4 retirements in a row at one point. So that's unfortunate luck for the Brazilian maestro. His teammate's up in 6th place and he's still doing what he can to close in on Fernando Alonso. And if he continues to set fastest laps, then Barrichello's got a good chance of jumping Alonso at some point. As we round the final few sequence of corners to start another lap, and still no driver making pit stops just yet. New fastest lap for Button, which is immediately eclipsed by Montoya. That was 2/10 quicker than Button on that previous lap, so now Montoya's is getting a move on. Down the Retta Aposta, that is opposite straight. Now we switch to Mark Webber. He's closing in on Nico Hülkenberg for 9th place. And he's looking to make up another position. Still no pit stops aside from the 2 between Massa and Glock. And they were quite early on. Rounding the curve de Sol, Mark Webber. Still closing in on Nico Hülkenberg. Now we switch to Juan Pablo Montoya, who's got Sato behind. That's Massa making an overtake on Nico Rosberg. That's for 17th place. Either that or Rosberg was taking a very wide line through the Senna S. So next target for Massa is Lewis Hamilton, right in front of him. Winner of the Chinese Grand Prix last time out. And becoming a new winner of the season. Let's try and work out how many different winners there have been. So we've had Felipe Massa, Lewis Hamilton, Robert Kubica. They've been different winners so far. Takuma Sato, of course. Then Montoya has won races as well. And then the 2 Toyotas. So Hamilton became the 7th different winner last time out at Shanghai. That could be a new record as well. I don't think we've had that many winners in a season as of yet. This is the 4th season of the GP4 Manager Series. First season took place in 2004. And that was won by Kimi Räikkönen. And then the next 2 championships were won by Takuma Sato, and he looks in good shape at the moment to make it 3 in a row. But the recovering Mark Webber is going to try and do something about that. Can he become champion for the first time in his career? We've got 40 laps to go to find out, as Adrian Sutil is making a move on Sebastian Vettel for 12th place. Daniel Ricciardo now pushing to try and catch up to Sergio Perez. 15th place Ricciardo, 14th place Perez. Still not with great race pace at the moment. At least BMW Sauber have been qualifying better. They've just got no race pace and no reliability as far as Heidfeld is concerned. Montoya sets a new fastest lap of the race, 1 minute 13.5. Gap is 2 seconds between himself and Button. Some side-by-side action at the Bico de Pato. Sutil ran a bit wide going into that particular corner, and Sebastian Vettel not too far behind. Now, who's in front there? We've got... That's a slowing Ferrari. I think that's Jarno Trulli slowing down. He's got a mechanical problem, and he's pulled off. So Trulli, and he's hit the wall as well. In frustration, maybe, or just misjudging the inside line of the Subida Dos Boxes curve. So Trulli becomes the 2nd retirement of the race. That's a shame. He was running quite well up in 7th or 8th place. 8th place, I think. And a throttle issue. That's unusual. Don't see that very often. So the linkage between throttle and engine has obviously gone a bit wrong. That was Button, and now this is Montoya, and now Mark Webber versus Nico Hülkenberg. This is it. Now this is the battle for 8th place, thanks to the retirement of Jarno Trulli. And Kubica's some 7 seconds up the road from these two. So Webber's going to have to do a little bit more to try and catch up to Robert and take that 7th place away. His teammates still leading the race on lap 33. The gap, 1.8 seconds between himself and Montoya. And Sato is 2 seconds off of Montoya and Raikkonen 1.4. So the top 4 separated by about 7 and a bit seconds. As we approach half distance now, and looking more likely that the field is going to just be doing 1 stops. On board with Hulkenberg. To his left is Mark Webber. He's making the move now. And Mark Webber takes 8th place off of the Super Aguri driver. So, if Sato retires from the race now, Webber would then move up to 7th. And that would give Mark enough points. So, for the moment, Mark can do all that he needs to do to try and win the championship. Providing, of course, Sato retires. And Suttle gaining a place. He's up to 10th now at the expense of Matthias Lauda. And I think Sergio Perez is going to lose a place to Daniel Ricciardo at some point during this lap. Gap was just 0.3 of a second. There is the battle going into Ferradura. Ricciardo looks like he'll make the overtake sooner rather than later. Perez has been struggling a little bit ever since the beginning of the race. Possibly down to soft tyres, possibly down to running a little bit more fuel than the others. But if everybody's one stopping, then it's probably not great race pace from the BMW Sauber. Jenson Button just eking out the gap a little bit between himself and Montoya. In fact, the top 4, they weren't separated by 7 seconds, they're actually separated by less than 6 seconds. So it's still close running between the top 4, and look at this now. Sergio Perez versus Daniel Ricciardo down the main straights. Let's see the power difference between the two. BMW Sauber have been working on their engine throughout the season, but Daniel Ricciardo has got more than enough straight line speed to make that overtake stick. Up to 13th place goes the Australian, who's been doing quite well ever since he took over from Kamui Kobayashi. He's on 17 points. And in half a season, that's not too bad. His teammates slowing down. That's 7th place. Robert Kubica pulling off right into the wilderness. That's the inside of Ferradura, Laranja and then Pinerino. And he shunts it into the wall in petulance as well. So pretty much at half distance, Robert Kubica suffers a mechanical issue. So that moves Webber up to 7th. Hulkenberg to 8th. Suttle 9th. Lauda up to 10th. And that was a transmission issue for Kubica, so let's say gearbox, but it could be drive shaft as well. There you can see Sato with Kimi Raikkonen behind and Montoya in front of him, so he's in a McLaren sandwich. And we switch to Sebastian Vettel, now running in 11th place, going down the main straight. And that looks like a strange line from the Ferrari. And that's why he's making the move on Matthias Lauda. So on board with Vettel from looking back, taking a strange line, that explains it. So Vettel moves up to 10th place now, I believe, ahead of Matthias Lauda, as Felipe Massa makes a move on Sergio Perez. So Perez has lost a place to Ricciardo, now he's lost a place to Hamilton, and now he's lost a place to Felipe Massa. So it's not going well for the Mexican driver. As Takuma Sato is just a second ahead of Kimi Raikkonen now. And McLaren seems to be closing in on the Honda driver. And Mark Webber getting a very strange exit out of the Bico de Pato curve. Seemed to get onto the curb and forced a lock-up. So I wonder if he's just pushing hard once again. As he exits Subida dos Boxes onto the main straight and about to start his 36th lap. So the gap between Webber and the race lead, 37 seconds, that is basically half a lap away from the race lead. So it's not been a bad recovery drive from Mark Webber. Now he's in 7th place, quite comfortably in 7th now, but he has still got Nico Hulkenberg quite close behind him. Looks as if that's the maximum Mark Webber can do. So he needs to hope for something to go wrong with Takuma Sato. We've still got half a race to go. Montoya in 2nd. Still chasing Jenson Button. We've now gone past half distance, so looks as if the field are one stopping. And when will these drivers make their only pit stops? Rounding his centre S is Montoya. The gap between himself and Jenson Button. Race leader for the Toyota is 2.6 seconds. So once again, Button appears to be edging out the gap between himself and the field behind him. And the gap remaining at a second between Sato and Raikkonen. Ebbs and flows a little bit. Sato at some points is quicker, but then Raikkonen at some points is quicker. And still in 5th place is Fernando Alonso. Now, what does that do for the battle for 3rd? Well, Montoya would lose 3rd to Jenson Button if it stays like this, because Button's only 4 points behind Montoya coming into this final race. And a race win would move him up to 3rd. But Alonso is still within an outside shot of taking 3rd in the championship. If something drastic happens to Button and Montoya, then Alonso would need a 3rd in order to get 3rd in the championship. And you never know, it could happen. You can see the view from the side of Montoya. Felipe Massa continuing his recovery. Trying to have a look at Nico Hülkenberg. No, it's not Hülkenberg, it's Lewis Hamilton. This is a battle for 13th place now. As we go on board with Montoya in 2nd. Break somewhere between the 50 and the 100 metre board into Descida de Lago. And it's flat out from here to Ferradura. You can see a radio broadcasting tower to your right, and it appears once again. Now it's to our left. And you can see what looks like a big skyscraper in blue. Some interesting scenery in the background as Massa now makes his move on Lewis Hamilton for 13th place, coming across the start-finish line. And he's got it. He got it before they even reached the start-finish line, so Ferrari horsepower put to good use there. And Montoya's starting to close in a little bit on Jenson Button once again. 2 tenths gained in the first couple of sectors. Let's see the gap as they exit the 3rd sector. Is Sergio Perez. Looking a bit choppy at the wheel, so working quite hard to try and stay with the driver in front, which is now Lewis Hamilton. With Massa having overtaken the Super Aguri driver. Now Perez can see the Super Aguri driver right in front of him once again. And the gap stayed at 2.4 seconds between Button and Montoya. Montoya's edging out a little bit over Sato as well, who has got Kimi Raikkonen in close quarters. It's 2.2 seconds, the gap between Montoya and Sato. And Sato looks a little bit more comfortable ahead of Raikkonen. The gap there is 1.3 seconds. And Alonso looking a little bit lonely now in 5th place. Barrichello in 6th in the other Williams. So going into Bico de Pato. Now coming out of it into Magulo on board with Jenson Button. And the gap staying the same at about 2.4 seconds. Looks closer to 2.5 actually. Now we switch to the Chinese Grand Prix winner, Lewis Hamilton. Stayed out of trouble pretty much, and that one-stop strategy was inspired. But this race not really working out well for him. Had that collision with his own teammate early in the race. And it cost Lewis a lot more than it cost Hülkenberg. So at the moment he sits in 14th place in between Felipe Massa and Sergio Perez. Nico Rosberg is 16th in the Toro Rosso. And then further back you've got the other Toro Rosso in there somewhere. Let's try and find out which position that is. We've got 3 retirements. The other Toro Rosso is in fact last. So Glock 18th, Albers 17th. And our 3 retirements so far all have been mechanically related. And they consist of Nick Heidfeld, who retired with a transmission problem. And they also consist of Jarno Trulli with a throttle problem and Robert Kubica with another transmission problem. I can just see on the pit indicator that Nico Hülkenberg is in the pits. So he's the first one out of the field to make a scheduled pit stop. So that will temporarily move Sebastian Vettel up a place. In fact, it's moved Adrian Sutil up into 8th place. But it'll move more drivers up the order. Vettel 9th. So Hülkenberg rejoins behind Timo Glock. It's usually a long pit lane. I think Jenson Button was making a pit stop because we've got Montoya in the race lead now. Takuma Sato will move it to 2nd place. So although Button was leading, he's the first one to make a pit stop. So this could help the 2 McLarens and Sato I think Fernando Alonso is making his first and only pit stop as well. We have now hit into the lap 40s, so it's pretty clear that the field will be making one stop. Now, where can Button and Alonso rejoin? I think Alonso's pit box was ahead of Button's because he'd briefly taken a position off of him, but Jensen was, of course, in his box taking some more fuel, some more shell fuel. And Webber moving up a place at the expense of Alonso temporarily. Can he rejoin ahead of Jensen Button? I don't think so. I think Jensen's taken that place so far. Massa and Ricciardo getting very close to each other, going down the main straight as Massa takes a position off of the Renault. So, coming out of Junsao. And the gaps. I think Jensen lost about half a minute, I reckon, over thanks to his pit stops, so that's how long pit stops appear to be taking. So Nico Rosberg coming down the Retta Aposta into Pesquida de Lago, and Montoya, Raikkonen and Sato and Barrichello, they've all stayed out for at least another lap. I'm going to calculate it's about 33 seconds to make a pit stop at Interlagos. So if you're making your pit stop earlier, that's probably the time, and then if you're making it later, it'll take a little bit less than 33 seconds. So that's the magic number that Montoya needs to reach if he's going to jump Jensen Button for the effective race lead. Then again, if Takuma Sato and Raikkonen run longer than Montoya, then they need to hit a magic number. On board with Sato's teammate Matthias Lauda as he starts a new lap. He's currently running in 10th place, and he's got Felipe Massa closing in on him. Behind Massa, Ricciardo, and then Hamilton not too far behind, so looks like Lewis Hamilton is going to try and make inroads into Daniel Ricciardo's position on track. There you can see Suttil ahead of Fernando Alonso. Alonso having made that pit stop, Suttil having yet to make a pit stop. And it looks like Alexander Wurz is making a pit stop, or he's just lost a position to Nico Hülkenberg, probably the latter, because it looks like the 5 arrows are on his screen rather than the word pit. And staying out for another lap was Montoya and Sato and Raikkonen and Barrichello. And that's going to help their chances if they're going to jump Jensen Button. Any other drivers making a pit stop at the moment? It's not at this stage, but it could well be happening soon. I can imagine... who else is going to make a pit stop? Suttil could be making a pit stop soon. He's been very good in this first part of the race. As rounding Bico de Pato is Montoya. And down Magulo. Short squirt, end of second sector into Junsao. Now keep an eye on where Montoya goes. Is he going to peel off to his left to make a pit stop, or is he going to stay to the right to continue for another lap? Let's see what Sebastian Vettel's up to. He's going to have a minor lockup going into Pesquida de Lago, but nothing too major. And he's in 9th place ahead of Matthias Lauda. And Vettel was one who dropped back a little bit during the first part of the race, so I imagine he's going quite a bit longer than most of the field. And the top 3, once again, staying out for another lap. And the gap is still 30.6 seconds between Montoya and Button, so it's not exactly getting bigger, but the longer Montoya goes, the shorter his pit stop will be, and that could help him to jump the Toyota driver for the lead. And we have got a pit stop underway. It is Adrian Suttil. From briefly 7th place, he's going to drop a few positions. And whereabouts is he going to rejoin? We're having a look at Mark Webber now, and he does need a bit of a miracle to happen if he's going to win the Drivers' Championship for the first time in his career. He currently sits in 6th place, 35 seconds off of the race lead, but of course he has to make a pit stop. So he's looking at 7th place at best, I reckon. Sato is continuing for another lap. I think Raikkonen was continuing for another lap as well, as was Montoya. So the next one to watch is Barrichello going to make a pit stop from 4th place. We'll keep an eye out on the timing screen. And Suttle, having made his pit stop, is way down the order behind Nico Hülkenberg even. So pit stops are taking an eternity for some reason here. It is a very long pit lane. But of course you do spend quite a long time in your box making your pit stop. So yeah, I think one stop is probably the correct option this time around. So there's your second place driver, Takuma Sato. Oh my goodness me, there's a big traffic jam that Hamilton had to try and avoid. Two cars almost stationary, so what on earth was going on? It was Matthias Lauda and Nico Rosberg, but it looked like a Renault on the right hand side, so I wonder if one of those was Daniel Ricciardo. So that's a peculiar one. New fastest lap for Nico Hülkenberg, that's a good effort. The driver coming into the pits, it was either Matthias Lauda or Nico Rosberg, because both of those were in the pits. But yeah, there was a car on the right hand side going really slowly. That must have been Ricciardo. So Sergio Perez now back up to 12th. And I imagine going a little bit longer than most of the field. When will he make his pit stop? More importantly, when will the top four make their pit stops? Daniel Ricciardo having another moment coming out of Vico de Pato. And he's struggling a little bit. Now he's got Sergio Perez closing in quite quickly into the back of him. As Perez got enough of a slipstream, it looks a bit too far back for it to make some sort of impact. Yeah, he's a bit too far back on this occasion, but now Perez can sniff a bit of an opportunity. Rubens Barrichello from 4th place pulling out of the race. So that's him out of the race. So once again, a bad day for the two Williamses. Massa was into the pits very early with an issue, and like we're seeing with some other drivers, Barrichello is expressing his frustration by ripping off some of his front wing and creating more work for his team. Montoya and Sato both into the pits together, so they've both gone to the same lap, end of lap 46. At the moment now, it is Kimi Raikkonen who takes the lead. And, that's why Barrichello's retired. Big orange fire. So once again, the Ferrari engine not proving very reliable this time. Now, can Montoya and Sato jump Jenson Button for what would be the effective race lead once Raikkonen makes the pit stop? Let's have a look on the timing screens. In fact, let's have a look at Jenson Button. He has jumped Sato and he has jumped Montoya. So Jenson Button's pace after his pit stop has proved pretty good because he's maintained what should be the race lead. So you can see Barrichello being wheeled back. So let's have a look at the order now. Webber has yet to make a pit stop. He's running in 5th place. Kimi Raikkonen yet to make his pit stop. Currently leads. Alonso, having made his pit stop, should regain 5th place off of Mark Webber once the Australian comes into the pits. And then you've got Felipe Massa up in 7th place at the moment, but I think he has to make a pit stop. Did make that unscheduled one. Sebastian Vettel in 8th place. Hamilton 9th. Both of those, I believe, have to make their first pit stops. So it should eventually put Nico Hülkenberg and Adrian Suttle back up the order. And there you can see, that's the gap between Button and Montoya. So it has come down a little bit thanks to Montoya's shorter pit stop. It is just 9/10 of a second. And Montoya has got slightly fresher tyres than the Toyota. But the tyres have proved quite durable here, so I imagine all these drivers can keep pushing now until the very end. But let's see what happens. Can Jenson Button hang on? There's Mark Webber in the background, so he's only just behind Takuma Sato. But don't forget that Mark Webber does have a pit stop to make, so can't really do much about it. As through Junsao goes Kimi Raikkonen. Now, is he going to make a pit stop? We have got Hamilton, Vettel and Ricciardo making their pit stops. So that temporarily moves Sergio Perez up into 8th place. As Kimi Raikkonen starts another lap. So that's one more lap compared to Button and Sato. But the gap is coming down between Raikkonen and Button. It came down by a 10th in the middle sector. How quick back is Jenson Button in the final sector. The Toyotas are quick in a straight line. They've got good grunts underneath them. Let's see, Vettel rejoins ahead of Matthias Lauda. They have still got some drivers needed to make pit stops. They should include Perez and Massa. A new fastest lap for Takuma Sato, so 1:13.454, as he tries to close in on Jenson Button and Montoya. Webber's in the pits. Mark Webber making his first pit stop. So that'll move Alonso back up a position. Felipe Massa will temporarily assume 6th place. Is Sergio Perez going to make a pit stop as well? Well, we're going to see Nico Hülkenberg have a massive collision. What on earth was that from Christian Albers? Hülkenberg was up the inside of him, and then he just takes a massive swipe left. Terrible, terrible driving from Christian Albers, and that's subtle. So not only has Albers ruined his own race and Hülkenberg's race, he's also ruined his own teammate's race. And there's a Ferrari lost his front wing as well. Sebastian Vettel says debris everywhere, and it's just caused utter carnage. And Kimi Raikkonen was making a pit stop as well, so I think he's just about avoided that chaos. I still think he should rejoin behind Sato though. Matthias Lauda is going to gain at least 2 positions. That's 1 on Vettel and then 1 on the spiker of Sutil. And behind Lauda, that is Hamilton going to do the same thing as well. There's Raikkonen leaving the pits. Just behind Sato actually, so top 4 now remaining as they were, as Daniel Ricciardo moves up a position at the expense of the wingless Vettel, and Sutil's creating a bit of a roadblock on Lauda and Hamilton, and that's going to give Ricciardo an opportunity. It's actually going to give Sergio Perez a bit of an opportunity to do something about this lot, as Sutil smokes his front tyres. He's got no front downforce and he's struggling, and Hamilton took advantage of that. He's taken the position off of Matthias Lauda. This is 2 drivers without front wings. It shouldn't be amusing, but it is a little bit. So Massa and Perez are now in the pits making pit stops. Where can they rejoin? They could benefit massively from this. Montoya, 2nd place, now right behind Jenson Button. Daniel Ricciardo looking to make a move and making a bit of contact with Matthias Lauda, who mounts the curbs a little bit as they exit the Curva do Sol. Massa is 7th at the moment. Perez is still dropping back, so he hasn't gained as much as he'd hoped. As Takuma Sato sets a new fastest lap of the race. It's all kicking off now with just 20 laps to go. And it is just half a second. Look at that. So Massa has actually stayed in 7th place. He's the one that's benefited massively from the massive conflab between Hülkenberg and Albers. If race bans existed, I wouldn't be at all surprised if Albers picked up a bit of a race ban for that one. That was disgraceful. So it's all moved Lewis Hamilton up into 8th place, Matthias Lauda up to 9th, Ricciardo 10th and Sergio Perez in 11th. And there's race leader Button, hacksawing away a little bit at the wheel at the Pinerino curve. He is under pressure from Montoya. You can see him in his right-hand mirror. Montoya all over the back of Button. Gap just 0.3 of a second, and are we going to see a change of race lead with just 20 laps to go? Going to exit lap 51. At the moment we're exiting Junsao and the Sobiados boxes curve. There's 3rd place Sato, and there's the race lead battle going through the final kink and onto the main straight. I think Montoya is going to take the race lead and is going to send the Colombian element into a frenzy as Montoya takes the lead of the race. So taking advantage of a slightly ragged Jenson Button and a slow exit, that's going to put Sato up into 2nd if Button's not careful. I think there's just enough of a gap to mean that Jenson Button will hang on to 2nd place at the moment. And he was one of the first to make the pit stops, and look at that, Lauda losing 10th place to Sergio Perez, so Perez is now in the points, and I think Ricciardo's taken Lauda as well, so looked like Lauda made a bit of a mistake and he's lost positions to Ricciardo and Perez. So rounding Magula, that's Lauda. He's picked up his rhythm once again, so yeah, I don't think it's a mechanical issue, but more of a mistake that he's made. So there is your new race leader, Juan Pablo Montoya, looking to finish his season on a high. And he's pulled out quite a bit of a gap over Jenson Button already, 1.4 seconds. and Button has got Sato all over the back of him, so we're going to be seeing a battle for second soon. There's Massa, who's recovered really well actually from his early mechanical issue, because he's now up in 7th place, 1 place behind Mark Webber, who is quick. He is quick out there at the moment, but Raikkonen now setting the new fastest lap, so he's going to try and make inroads into the top 3. What a race this has been. And it's still pretty much undecided. Jenson Button defending very heavily from Takuma Sato, going down Retro Posta, and hanging on to second place at the moment. But that was firm from Jenson. He wants that second place. Oh, doing what he can to try and hold on to second place. And the new fastest lap for Mark Webber, 1 minute 13.084. And Sato better be careful. Jenson, of course, is Mark Webber's teammate, and that defence was more than just trying to hold on to second. He's going to try and help his teammate out. Hold up Sato as much as he can to try and destabilise him. I think Jenson did make a bit of a mistake coming out of the Pinarino curve, because Montoya's pulled out a second over Jenson. And Jenson's going to be coming under pressure from Takuma Sato once again as they cross the line onto lap 54. Montoya leads, the gap is 2.5 seconds. Jenson Button in second, under pressure from Takuma Sato. And Kimi Raikkonen closing in on the pair of them as well. And looking a tad more comfortable actually for Jenson. It's 0.6 of a second as they cross the line together, the gap, himself and Sato. And now Kimi Raikkonen's actually the one on the move. He was the last of the top 4 to make pit stop, so he's got the fresh tyres. And can he do something about the top 2? Could be seeing a McLaren 1-2 if things go their way. We've still got a bit to go, as we have hit 3/4 distance now. Just 17 laps to go. We have a quick look at Nico Rosberg in 13th place, locking up going into the Bico de Pato curve. Probably the slowest corner on the circuit actually, although looking at it, it's about 55 miles an hour in what is a twisty middle sector, but generally quite a fast circuit. And it is one of my personal favourites actually. Usually go well on it when I try it out in F1 games, because it's got a nice rhythm to it. It's Raikkonen versus Sato for 3rd place, going into Senna S. Sato hanging on round the outside. And now Sato's the one under pressure. Got a poor run coming out of the Senna S, and Raikkonen's got a golden opportunity to get onto the podium. And he's up the inside now. Raikkonen using that Mercedes power to get ahead of the Honda, and surely that's going to be 3rd place. Yes, it is. 3rd place now for Kimi Raikkonen. Sato dropping down a position, but no panic. He's still ahead of Mark Webber. Webber in 6th place now, behind Fernando Alonso in 5th. And further back, you've got Massa in 7th, Hamilton 8th, Ricciardo 9th, and Sergio Perez in 10th place, as Montoya puts a lap on Nico Rosberg round the outside at the Bico de Pato hairpin. And there's a camera operative on the inside of that corner, keeping an eye on the action. There goes Montoya, up the hill, through the kinks, past some Johnny Walker advertising, now some orange advertising. Used to be a sponsor for the Arrows team back in the 2000s. One of my favourite liveries actually, the black and orange Arrows. And in the hands of Verstappen and Pedro de la Rosa, it wasn't too bad either. Very slippery in a straight line, but quite unreliable. So the gap between Montoya and Button, 3 seconds now. And now it's Kimi Raikkonen in 3rd place. And he's definitely going to challenge Jenson Button soon. The gap is just 0.4 of a second. And there's Adrian Sutil, who can count himself very frustrated by what's happened in the race. Looking good for some points, but his teammate caused a massive collision on the main straight, a very dangerous collision. And Sutil caught up in some of the debris, having to make that unscheduled pit stop, as did Sebastian Vettel behind him. And as a result, they sit 15th and 16th. They had to do pretty much a whole lap with no front wing. So coming round the final few kinks once again, and this is a challenge for second place. Kimi Raikkonen versus Jenson Button, crossing the start-finish line. And Kimi Raikkonen was 1,000th of a second ahead of Jenson Button as they crossed the line. And more importantly, up into second place. So now Jenson Button, he's got Takuma Sato to deal with once again. And they were very close to each other coming out of Curva de Sol, on board with Takuma Sato. He's got the inside line now, under braking for the Skida de Lago, and Takuma Sato takes that third place off of Jenson Button. So Button's starting to slip down the order now with tyres that are a little bit older compared to the two McLarens and the Honda of Sato. But fourth place should still be his. He's quite a way ahead of Fernando Alonso. You saw Nico Rosberg once again having a lock-up, this time going into Laranja. A lock-up this time going into Bico de Pato. And there is your new third place driver, Takuma Sato. Still comfortably ahead of Mark Webber, and that would comfortably give him the Drivers' Championship, because Webber needs to outscore Sato by 6 points. And with Sato still running, it doesn't look likely. So coming onto the main straight. The gap between Montoya and Raikkonen went up from 3.3 seconds to 4.1 seconds, and that was because Raikkonen had to overtake Nico Rosberg to lap him, so Montoya pulling out a little bit just when he needs to, if he's going to take another victory. And Kimi Raikkonen yet to score a win this season, and he'd be quite keen to do so. He has got younger tyres compared to Montoya, but not by too much. Let's have a look at Timo Glock for a bit. He's up to 12th place now, so despite that early mechanical issue resulting in an early pit stop, he's kept out of it, and he's up the order a little bit. A couple of places off of points. But it's not been a bad recovery drive, actually. Now then, Rosberg, the mobile chicane, trying to get out of the way of Sato and get a mess of that as Massa has a big lock-up going into the Senna S. Now, was that actually contact between Rosberg and Sato going into Bico de Pato? We'll keep an eye out on that in the timing screen, but at the moment we are having a look at the home hero, Felipe Massa, highest placed Brazilian in the race, thanks to the retirement of Rubens Barrichello, but not the highest placed driver from South America. That belongs to Juan Pablo Montoya. That looked like a new fastest lap for Kimi Raikkonen. There's confirmation of that on the screen. Raikkonen was 3/10 of a second quicker on that lap compared to his teammate. So Kimi Raikkonen hasn't given up on winning this race just yet. And the gap going through the first sector was 3.8. Still 3.8, but a little bit more actually. Montoya was 5,000ths quicker in the first sector. And both Sato and Button have cleared the mobile chicane of Nico Rosberg. So now they can, well, theoretically resume their battle for third, but Sato looks the quicker at the moment thanks to his younger tyres compared to Button. So I'm not expecting too much of a battle at the moment. Through Bico de Pato, and there's not long to go in the race now, just 13 or so laps, and the gap indeed extending between Sato and Button by 0.2 of a second in the middle sector. So Raikkonen was quicker in the middle sector by 1/10 of a second compared to Montoya. Now they're starting another lap, and the gap between Raikkonen and Montoya, the graphic switches to the number of pit stops. So we'll never know for a few more laps. Further down the order, you've still got Alonso in 5th place. Quite a comfortable 5th place. 6th place, Mark Webber. That's pretty much just as comfortable as well, but it's not what Webber wants. He wants championship glory, but he needs Sato to retire. Massa in 7th. Good recovery drive after his mechanical issue. Hamilton up into 8th place, and thanks to that incident between Albers and Hulkenberg, that's helped Hamilton quite a lot actually. He stayed away from the debris. In fact, he might well have been ahead of the debris when that accident happened. He was. I think he was actually. No, he wasn't. Rewind the footage to see what happens there, but Hamilton up in 8th, which is a good recovery after his first lap incident with his own teammate Nico Hulkenberg. 9th place, you have got Daniel Ricciardo now, so Renault up into the points. which is good for them after Kubica's transmission failure from 7th place earlier in the race. And Sergio Perez has snuck into the points now thanks to his longer strategy and, crucially, staying away from that violent collision between Albers and Hülkenberg. But BMW Sauber need more points than that if they're going to overhaul Ferrari. They need 7 or 8 points, so basically they need a 6th place. And that's very unlikely to happen. Still the two McLarens up at front, but Raikkonen is bringing the gap down. It's now 3.1 seconds between himself and Montoya, and Sato's 3.2 seconds behind Kimi Raikkonen now. So I think Sato could well be settling for 3rd place in the race. Raikkonen needs to catch up to Montoya a bit of a quicker pace, and in fact Montoya was a little bit quicker in the middle sector that time. And Sato was quite a bit quicker than Button in the middle sector, by 0.6 of a second. So look further back down the order. Glock, 12th, not too far behind Matthias Lauda in 11th, who is in 11th place. And they're all fairly spaced out actually between Ricciardo, Perez, Lauda and Glock. So not expecting a battle to happen there soon. Just saw on the graphic there, new fastest lap for Takuma Sato, and he's broken 73 seconds, so he's lapping now in the 1 minute 12s as he tries to catch up to Kimi Raikkonen, and he's doing a decent job of it. 2.6 seconds behind the Flying Finn, who himself was a little bit quicker than Montoya in the first sector. Now the gap is under 3 seconds. And Jenson Button looks as if he's settling for that 4th place. Montoya being badly held up by Timo Glock going through Bico de Pato. As we switch to Sergio Perez, smoking his front tyres going into John Sau as he tries to catch up to Daniel Ricciardo, but they're both lapping at very similar paces. But Perez is comfortable enough ahead of Matthias Lauda to hang on to 10th place. Perez started 9th on the grid, but he had some poor pace earlier in the race, which meant that he couldn't really utilise his high grid slot. And that gap, 2.1 seconds between Montoya and Raikkonen, so Montoya lost a good chunk of time in that middle sector trying to lap Timo Glock, trying to lap the 12th place Timo Glock. So everyone in the top 11 is on the lead lap, but Matthias Lauda is the next one to be lapped, and that will happen because Montoya's not too far behind. In fact, they're on pretty much the same straight, exiting Descida de Lago into the Ferradura. And Sergio Perez struggling a little bit with his tyres and car. He's locking up very frequently. A lock up at some point between Larancha and Pinurino. So he's now pushing to try and stay ahead of Matthias Lauda. He was actually 0.2 quicker in the middle sector, so he's not doing too bad a job actually. Montoya exits John Sau. Where's Matthias Lauda? He shouldn't be too far in front. There's Timo Glock, about to be lapped by Kimi Raikkonen. And the gap is 2.5 seconds between the two McLaren drivers. And it's gone up a little bit from the previous lap by 0.4 because Montoya has set a new fastest lap of the race. So he's responding to the challenge of Kimi Raikkonen and also responding to being held up by Rosberg. And he's now trying to extend the gap. There's 3rd place Takuma Sato. He's not got long to go now before he becomes a 3-time champion. If it stays like this, of course. And there's Jenson Button, having led it in the early stages. Took advantage of Felipe Massa's mechanical issue, but an early pit stop meant slightly older tyres compared to the rest of the top 4, and as a result, Jenson's now gone from 1st to 4th. So Kimi Raikkonen about to put the lap on Timo Glock going around the outside of Bico de Pato. Glock's making it very difficult for both McLaren drivers, giving them equal treatment I suppose, and as a result the gap has gone back up to 3.3 seconds. So I think it's cost Raikkonen more than it's cost Montoya. But now Montoya's next one, Matthias Lauda right in front of him. 11th place, Matthias Lauda slowing a little bit, making it quite easy for Montoya actually. Good awareness from the Austrian. as he brakes for the first corner. Oh, that's why his engines failed. That's why he was so compliant to Montoya, because the Honda engine has gone. Now that's going to be a bit of a worry for Takuma Sato if reliability may well be on the edge, because one Honda has gone. Will the other one go? There is Takuma Sato about to enter a wall of orange smoke, courtesy of his own teammate. There it goes. Matthias Lauda loses a place to Timo Glock inevitably, and then he'll lose one to Rosberg, Suttil, Wirtz and Vettel. In fact, I just saw Wirtz lose a position, actually, to the recovering Adrian Suttil. Suttil, I imagine, on much fresher tyres compared to Wirtz. Well, they're probably not that much fresher because he had to make his pit stop at around the same time as the later of the one-stoppers. There's Matthias Lauda having pulled off with his engine properly on fire. It says oil leak, but yeah, it's an engine failure. The fastest lap for Kimi Raikkonen as he tries to resume his charge on Montoya. It's 2.8 seconds the gap between the two McLaren drivers, and Takuma Sato, having slipped back a little bit from the pair, he knows that his third place will seal him the World Championship comfortably over Mark Webber. Switch to Sergio Perez in 10th place now. He's comfortably in 10th. He's got Timo Glock in 11th, some 6 seconds behind him. Perez is the next one to be lapped by Montoya. I imagine he'd be trying to push hard to try and keep that lap, because if anything happens to the top 10, then Perez could get another point or two. 2.7 seconds the gap between the two McLarens as they cross the second sector point, and that's Timo Glock being lapped by Takuma Sato now at exactly the same place as where the two McLarens lapped the German driver, the outsider Bico de Pato. Now it's Jenson Button's turn to lap the German, as the two McLarens start another lap. 5 laps to go now, and it looks as if the two McLarens will be finishing 1 and 2 if it stays like this. And Takuma Sato dropping back a little bit from the two McLarens now. Now more than 4 seconds behind. So it seems that McLarens have been very quick in this race. They've got the car beautifully set up for race trim. Where did they start as well? They started 6th and 8th, so that's actually a very good performance from the two McLarens. Possibly running hard tyres, maybe. I can only speculate on that. You can run 3 different compounds of tyre in this series, the hard, medium and the soft. Hard's obviously much quicker in the race, soft's quicker in qualifying, and medium a nice balance between the two. And you have to use 5 compounds of each throughout the season, minimum. So some teams will run more of some or the others. I think we just saw Daniel Ricciardo having a bit of a lock-up going into Junsao, as he is in 9th place. Sergio Perez not too far behind. There is the Mexican. And just behind the Mexican is Montoya, the race leader. So Ricciardo's minor mistake lost him about 0.3 of a second, as there is now 4 laps to go. The McLarens to complete the season on a high. And it's quite impressive considering they haven't had a team boss since a few races ago. Alexander Wirtz having a lock-up into Junsao. But McLaren will be taken over by the boss of the BMW Sauber team for next season. And it is rumoured actually that the BMW Sauber will be supplying McLaren next season, but that's to be revealed in due course. You can see the gainers and losers, 5 and 6 places for the two McLarens. You can see down at 6 for Felipe Massa, the pole sitter for this race. Up 4 for Hamilton, up 11 for Ricciardo, so staying out of the chaos from 20th on the grid to be 9th in the race. Perez was down 1 place, and Rosberg having qualified last and staying out of the trouble. He's up 10 places. He's up from 22nd up to 12th. Suttil 13th, Vettel 14th, and Wirtz 15th. That completes the 15 runners at the moment. On the list of retirements, we've got Matthias Lauda with an engine failure. Barrichello also had an engine failure. 2 transmission failures for Robert Kubica and Nick Heidfeld, more likely to be a gearbox. Then Jarno Trulli had a broken throttle mechanism, and then Christian Albers and Nico Hulkenberg had an unfortunate collision coming onto the main straight, where Albers pretty much just shunted into Hulkenberg. And with 3 laps to go, there's a look at the race leader, Juan Pablo Montoya, and he's about to lap Sergio Perez. I think Perez will be lapped before the end of the race. Looks close enough there, but once he gets super close, then Montoya will be able to overtake Perez cleanly and easily. He switched to the outboard shot of the Mexican. Going to see him lift off the throttle a little bit going through the final few kinks. And as Montoya starts his penultimate lap. And Perez not making it easy for him. But I imagine coming out of the Curva de Sol, he'll be just blend off the throttle and let the Colombian through. Switch to Takuma Sato as he starts his penultimate lap of the race. His Honda has been nice and reliable for this race, unlike that of his teammates who suffered that massive fire. The gap between the 2 McLarens, 2.4 seconds. So it looks as if Montoya and Raikkonen's battle has been settled in favour of the Colombian. Raikkonen just a bit too far back to close up any more than he is doing. He's made a good effort of it. It looks as if Montoya will be taking the race win unless something dramatic happens in the final couple of laps. There's a look at the driver currently in last place, Alexander Wirtz. And he's the only driver without points this season, and being down in 15th, it does seem unlikely that he'll actually score points. So, Wirtz looking set. And with both Toro Rossos out of the points, it looks as if they're set as Rosberg goes off the track at Bico de Pato, pushing way too hard, braking way too late, and that just sums up their season. They look to be heading for last in the Constructors' Championship, unfortunately. Montoya started his final lap now, and the gap's still coming down fractionally between himself and Kimi Raikkonen. It is 2.2 seconds, but across this final lap, and with the cars so even between each other, especially between the top 4, Button's definitely dropped back now with his older tyres, but it's been a good race between the top 4. Any one of those could have won, and it looks as if it is going the way of Montoya. So through the Ferradura, on board with Takuma Sato. He just needs to complete this final lap, and he is a 3-time champion. That's Lavancha, it's the Pinerino. Now we switch to race leader Montoya as he enters the final sector. Magulo. Short straight before the 90-degree left of Junsao. And here he goes, about to begin the climb, the rise up the hill, and in front of what is probably a large area of Colombian fans in the crowd, out of the final kink, and it is going to be Montoya who takes the final win of the season. Or the win of the final race of the season. Raikkonen 2 seconds behind, and there's your new 3-time champion, Takuma Sato. Defended it successfully for the 2nd season running. And that'll be a bit of heartache for Mark Webber. Just had too much to do after that early race spin. So Jenson Button will come home 4th, there goes Alonso 5th, and Mark Webber not too far behind the Spaniard in the end, but 6th place for Mark Webber. He'll be a bit unhappy about that one, but nevertheless Toyota have got a good Constructors' Championship win. Quite comfortable in the end. And Felipe Massa coming home in 7th place, which is a good recovery drive. Hamilton will come home 8th eventually, and Perez has already crossed the line in 10th, so he gets that final point. So now we're just awaiting for Hamilton and Ricciardo to complete their final laps, and they'll be classified in 8th and 9th place. So there is your 3-time champion, Takuma Sato. And where will he be next season? We'll be finding out once the 2008 driver rosters will be revealed. But for the moment, we'll confirm the race results. Montoya winning from Kimi Raikkonen and Takuma Sato 3rd. And that wraps up the 2007 championship. The next race will be the start of the 2008 championship, with drivers swapping aplenty and suppliers also swapping aplenty. So from me, we shall see you then.